Tylen Vask had worked at the border station for 11 years. In all that time, he had never seen a reading he could not explain. He was a sensor officer, and sensor officers did not panic. They read numbers, they checked data, they filed reports. That was the job, and Tylen was very good at it. The Watcher's Crest was an imperial border station that floated at the very edge of Viaglory space. It was old. The metal walls had a greenish color from age, and the lights buzzed in a way that nobody ever bothered to fix. The station watched the neutral corridor, a wide strip of empty space that separated the Valori Galactic Empire from the wild, uncharted territories beyond. Nothing interesting ever came from the neutral corridor. That was what everyone said. That was what everyone believed, until today. Tylen was halfway through his third cup of stimulant tea when his console made a sound. It was not the normal sound. The normal sound was a soft chime that meant a cargo ship or a lost freighter had wandered too close to the border. This sound was deeper, longer. It was the sound the system made when something very large translated out of subspace. He put down his tea and looked at the screen. The first thing he noticed was the mass reading. It was enormous. The number sat on his screen like a joke someone had played on him. He blinked at it. He leaned closer. The object that had just dropped out of subspace had the mass of a Dreadnought-class warship. That was not possible. Nobody built dreadnoughts anymore. The Empire had not built one in over 1,000 years because there was nothing in the galaxy that required that much firepower. And the second thing he noticed was the energy output. This was the number that made him put down his tea very carefully and sit up very straight in his chair. The energy reading was 6 times higher than anything in the Imperial fleet. 6 times. Not twice. Not 3 times. 6. Tylen did what any good sensor officer would do. He assumed his equipment was broken. He ran a full recalibration on his sensor array. This took 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes, he told himself that the border station was old, the equipment was old, and old equipment sometimes gave bad readings. This was normal. This was fine. There was nothing out there that could produce those numbers. Nothing in the known galaxy. The recalibration finished. He ran the scan again. The numbers were the same. His hand moved to the communication panel, and he pressed the button for Commander Solan's quarters. It was the middle of the night cycle, and he knew she would not be happy about being woken up. But Tylen had a rule. When the numbers did not make sense, you told someone who outranked you. That way, when everything went wrong, it was their problem. Commander Drea Solan arrived on the sensor deck 12 minutes later. She was Chelith, which meant she was tall, thin, and covered in a hard shell that clicked when she walked. She had 4 arms, and she used all of them to express how unhappy she was about being awake. "This had better be worth my sleep, Vask," she said. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I am not sure what it is worth, Commander," Tylen said. He pointed at his screen. "But I have checked the readings twice." Solan leaned over his shoulder. She was quiet for a long time. Tylen could hear the clicking of her mandibles, which meant she was thinking, or angry. With Chelith, it was hard to tell the difference. "Run a full spectral analysis," she said. "I want to know what that thing is made of." Tylen ran the analysis. The results came back in pieces, and each piece made the situation stranger. The hull of the unknown ship was made of a steel titanium alloy, which was primitive. No advanced species used steel anymore. But layered over the steel was a carbon nanoweave of extraordinary density, and beneath that was something the database could not identify. The computer labeled it unknown crystalline lattice and offered no further explanation. "Steel," Solan said. She said the word like it tasted bad. "So who builds a warship out of steel?" "Someone who started with steel and kept building on top of it," Tylen said quietly. Solan looked at him. She did not like that answer. She did not like it because it implied something she was not ready to think about. A species that started with primitive materials and layered advanced technology on top of them was a species that had evolved very quickly. Too quickly. "Has it transmitted anything?" she asked. "Not yet. Wait." Tylen's console chimed again. "The ship's transponder is syncing with our translation systems now." They watched the screen together. The translation software worked through the signal, converting the unknown language into Galactic Common. It was rough, the grammar was wrong in several places, but the message was clear enough. UNS Prometheus. Terran Unified Navy. Requesting open dialogue. Sulan read the message 3 times. Then she turned to the junior officer at the station behind them. Pull up the species registry. Search for Terran. The junior officer was a young Vylori with nervous eyes. He searched the database and found the file quickly. It was small. Most Tier 9 species files were small because there was not much to say about civilizations that had not yet left their own planet. Terrans, the junior officer read aloud, also known as humans. Homeworld Earth, Sol System, Outer Territories. Classification, Tier 9, Pre-Space Flight, Primitive. Last survey, 197 standard years ago. Technology level at time of survey, chemical propulsion rockets, fossil fuel combustion, early nuclear fission. Notes: the species shows moderate intelligence, but is heavily divided into competing tribal nations. No unified government, no spacefaring capability, projected time to spaceflight, 400 to 600 years. The sensor deck was very quiet after that. Tylan looked at the mass reading on his screen. He looked at the energy output. He looked at the transponder signal that said Terran Unified Navy. Then he looked at the file that said Pre-Space Flight Primitive. That can't be a human warship, Sulan said. She said it plainly, like she was stating a fact. The sky is blue, water is wet. That cannot be a human warship because humans did not have warships. Humans had barely figured out how to leave their own atmosphere the last time anyone checked. The idea that they had built something that produced 6 times the energy of an Imperial capital ship was not just unlikely, it was absurd. Run the scan again, Sulan ordered. Tylan ran the scan again. This was the 3rd time. The numbers did not change. They never changed. The object in the neutral corridor was real, it was massive, and it was broadcasting a human identifier. I need to contact the 9th Fleet, Sulan said. She straightened up and her shell clicked in a way that meant she had made a decision. Admiral Jur needs to see this. Admiral Kathos Jur was the commander of the 9th Expansion Fleet, and he was exactly the kind of person that Tylan did not want involved in this situation. Jur was old, even by Vylori standards. His scales had gone from green to a dull gray, and his eyes had the look of someone who had spent too many years being right about everything and had forgotten what it felt like to be wrong. He was a supremacist in the old imperial tradition. He believed that the Vylori were the greatest species the galaxy had ever produced, and he believed that every other species existed somewhere on a scale between useful and irrelevant. Humans he had probably never thought about at all. The communication was brief. Sulan transmitted the sensor data, the transponder signal, and the spectral analysis. She explained that she had checked the readings multiple times and that the data appeared to be accurate. Admiral Jur's response came back 14 minutes later. He was laughing. Tylan could hear it in the audio message. The old admiral was actually laughing. Commander Sulan, Jur said, and his voice had the sound of someone explaining something obvious to a child. I have reviewed your sensor data. What you have detected is most likely a derelict vessel that some primitive species has strapped an oversized reactor to. The energy readings are impressive, I grant you, but energy is not capability. A fire burns hot, but it does not think. These humans, if that is what they truly are, have probably built themselves a very large, very loud toy and are now flying it around the galaxy hoping someone will be impressed. There was a pause in the message. Then Jur continued. I am dispatching Patrol Group 7 to intercept. 12 Cathari-class cruisers should be more than sufficient to escort these primitives back to whatever corner of space they crawled out of. If they resist, Commander Vryn has my authorization to use appropriate force. This matter does not require further attention from this command. Jur out. The message ended. Sulan stood very still for a long time. Tylan watched her and said nothing. He did not look at the spectral analysis, Sulan said finally. No, Commander, Tylan agreed. He did not. The crystalline lattice in the hull, the layered shielding signatures, the reactor output. No, Commander. Sulan turned to face the viewport. Through the thick glass, they could see nothing but stars. The Prometheus was out there somewhere, too far away to see with the naked eye, but very much real, very much waiting. 12 cruisers, Sulan said. She said it the way someone might say 12 paper boats before a storm. Tylan looked at his console one more time. The energy readings from the unknown ship had been climbing slowly and steadily since it first appeared. At first, he had thought this was a sensor error too, but it was not an error. First, the ship was powering up. Whatever systems it had been running in a low state, it was now bringing them online. The numbers climbed higher and higher, and Tylan realized with a cold feeling in his stomach that what they had been reading was the ship at rest, idle, sleeping. Now it was waking up. Somewhere out in the dark between the stars, 12 Valori cruisers were making the jump to the neutral corridor. Their crews were probably joking about the mission, escort duty for some primitives who had gotten lost. Easy work. Maybe they would be back in time for the evening meal. Tylan picked up his tea. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway, because he had a feeling it was going to be a very long night. On his screen, the energy readings continued to climb. The Prometheus was waiting. Quinton and Patrol Group 7 had no idea what they were flying toward. In the halls of the Watcher's Crest, Commander Sue Lan walked back to her quarters. She did not sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall, and thought about a species that had gone from burning dead plants for fuel to building a ship that made the entire Imperial fleet look like children's toys. She thought about how they had done it in less than 200 years. She thought about what kind of species could do that, and then she thought about what kind of fear could drive them to do it. She did not sleep at all that night, and in the morning, when the reports started coming in from the neutral corridor, she was not surprised. She was not surprised at all, because she had checked the readings herself, and the readings had been very, very clear. Whatever was coming, the Empire was not ready for it, not even close. Patrol Commander Essek Vryn stood on the bridge of the Fang of Dominion and felt good about himself. He was young for a patrol commander. His scales were still bright green, and his eyes were sharp and hungry. He had earned his rank through ambition and political connections in equal measure, and he wore his uniform like it had been designed specifically for his body. In his mind, he was already an admiral. He just needed the right moment to prove it. This mission, he thought, was not that moment, but it was easy duty, and easy duty still looked good on a service record. The 12 Cathari-class cruisers of Patrol Group 7 dropped out of subspace in perfect formation. This was something Vryn had drilled into his crews for months. The formation was flawless. So 12 ships, each one 1.2 kilometers long, arranged in a standard encirclement pattern. Their hulls were smooth and dark purple, and their plasma lances glowed with a faint blue light along the weapons rails. They were beautiful ships. Vryn loved looking at them. He loved knowing that each one carried enough firepower to burn a small moon down to bare rock. "All ships report ready, Commander," said his communications officer. "Good," Vryn said. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the main viewport. "Where is our guest?" The sensor officer pointed at the screen. There was a single contact ahead of them, sitting motionless in the empty space of the neutral corridor. It was just a dot on the sensor display, a blip, nothing special. "Open a channel," Vryn said. "Why, she's standard Imperial warning." He cleared his throat and spoke in his most commanding voice. "Unidentified vessel, this is Patrol Commander Essek Vryn of the Vialori Imperial Navy. You have entered restricted space. You are ordered to power down your weapons, transmit your navigation logs, and prepare to be escorted out of this sector. Failure to comply will be met with force. You have 60 seconds to respond." He was proud of how that sounded. He had practiced it. The seconds ticked by. Vryn waited. His bridge crew waited. 40 seconds passed, and then the communications officer spoke. "Commander, the vessel is responding. Audio and visual. Put it on screen." The main display flickered and then showed something that Vryn had never seen before. It was a face, a human face. It belonged to a woman who appeared to be somewhere in her middle years, though it was hard to tell with an alien species. She had dark hair pulled back tight, brown skin, and a thin scar that ran from her left eyebrow down to her cheek. Her eyes were calm, not afraid, not angry, just calm, the way deep water was calm. "This is Captain Lena Vasquez of the United Nations Ship Prometheus, Terran Unified Navy," the woman said. Her galactic common was better than the transponder signal had suggested, though she spoke it with a strange, hard accent. "We are on a peaceful diplomatic mission to the Valori High Conclave. We carry no hostile intent. We request passage and an audience with your government. Vryn stared at her. She did not look like what he had expected. He was not sure what he had expected. Here's the file said humans were soft-skinned mammals with no natural armor, no claws, no venom glands, and no biological advantages worth noting. This woman had none of those things, but she had something in her eyes that made Vryn uncomfortable. It was the look of someone who had seen violence and had made peace with it long ago. Your request is denied, Vryn said. You will power down and submit to escort. This is not negotiable. I understand your position, Commander, Vasquez said, but I must respectfully decline. We have traveled a very long way, and we will not be turning around. I would prefer to resolve this through conversation. Vryn felt a flash of irritation. He was not used to being told no. He opened his mouth to respond, but his sensor officer interrupted him. Commander, the officer said. His voice was different now, quieter. I have visual on the target. Put it on the secondary display. The secondary screen lit up with a magnified image of the human ship, and every sound on the bridge stopped. The Prometheus was enormous. It was 4.7 kilometers long. Vryn's brain processed that number slowly because it did not make sense. His own ship, the Fang of Dominion, was 1.2 kilometers. The Prometheus was nearly 4 times that length. It hung in space like a mountain that someone had carved into the shape of a weapon. Its hull was angular and harsh, with sharp edges and flat planes that gave it the appearance of something that had been built for one purpose and one purpose only. There were no smooth curves, no elegant lines. It was brutal. It was honest about what it was, and it was covered in weapons, thousands of them. Turret mounts lined every surface of the hull in neat, terrifying rows, missile bays, point defense clusters, and along the spine of the ship, a series of larger weapons whose purpose Vryn could not identify, but whose size made his stomach feel cold and empty. That is not possible, Vryn whispered. Commander, the sensor officer said, and now his voice was shaking slightly. I am reading layered shielding around the vessel, multiple overlapping energy barriers. Our records show that layered shielding is a theoretical concept. No species has ever successfully deployed it. What about their reactor? Contained stellar fusion, Commander. The reactor output is... He paused. He checked his numbers. He checked them again. The reactor output is approximately 6 times greater than our most powerful capital ship. The bridge was silent. 1,200 crew members across 12 ships, and nobody was making a sound. Vryn looked at the Prometheus on his screen. He looked at his 12 cruisers arranged around it in their perfect formation. He felt like a man who had brought a knife to a fight and then discovered that his opponent had brought a volcano, but he had his orders. Admiral Jur had authorized the use of force, and Essek Vryn had not climbed this far by hesitating. All ship, he said, fire warning volley, plasma lances, 15% power, target the space directly ahead of the vessel. 12 cruisers fired simultaneously. Blue-white beams of plasma energy lanced across the void, converging on a point just ahead of the Prometheus. It was a standard warning shot, designed to demonstrate capability and resolve. The beams hit the Prometheus's shields and then vanished. Not deflected, not scattered. They simply disappeared. The energy was absorbed into the shield matrix and was gone. Vryn's sensor officer made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. The shields absorbed our fire, Commander, he reported. All of it. The shield strength has not decreased. It has increased by 0.3%. The ship is converting our weapons fire into stored energy. Vryn felt the blood drain from his face. He had shot at the human ship, and he had literally made it stronger. The communications console chimed. Captain Vasquez appeared on screen again. She looked exactly the same as before. Calm, patient. We will count that one as a greeting, she said. The next one, we won't. Vryn's first officer, a scarred veteran named Torath, leaned close to him and spoke quietly. Commander, I strongly recommend we contact Admiral Jur and request new orders. This is not what we were told to expect. Vryn should have listened. Any reasonable officer would have listened. But Vryn was not reasonable in that moment. He was embarrassed. He was embarrassed that his warning shot had been swallowed like it was nothing. He was embarrassed that an alien woman was looking at him from her screen with an expression that was dangerously close to pity, and he was embarrassed that his bridge crew had seen all of it. "All ships," Vryn said, and his voice was tight and hard. "Full broadside. All weapons. Fire." 12 Cathari-class cruisers unleashed everything they had. Plasma lances at full power, kinetic accelerators, missile batteries. The combined firepower of Patrol Group 7 was enough to crack the crust of a planet. The void between the cruisers and the Prometheus turned white with energy, and for a moment, no one could see anything at all. Then the light faded. The Prometheus was untouched. Its shields shimmered faintly, like the surface of a lake after a pebble had been tossed into it. Nothing more. And then the ship moved. It should not have been able to move the way it did. It was 4.7 kilometers long and had the mass of a small asteroid. Ships that size move slowly and deliberately, like great beasts turning in deep water. That was how physics worked. That was how the universe worked. The Prometheus did not care about any of that. It accelerated so fast that half the sensor displays in the patrol group glitched trying to track it. One moment, it was ahead of the formation. The next moment, it was between the cruisers, reweaving through the encirclement like a fish sliding between rocks in a stream. Point defense turrets on its hull swatted away incoming missiles without any apparent effort, the way a person might brush crumbs off a table. The remaining plasma beams bent around the ship's shield geometry and dissipated into nothing. The entire engagement lasted 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, the Prometheus had repositioned itself to the center of the formation, surrounded by all 12 cruisers, and had not fired a single shot. It had simply shown them that it could go wherever it wanted, and there was nothing they could do about it. On the bridge of the Fang of Dominion, Vryn gripped the railing in front of him so hard that his claws left marks in the metal. "Commander," the sensor officer said. His voice had gone very flat, which was what happened when someone's brain decided that emotions were no longer useful. "Their shields are at 97%. Our entire barrage reduced their shield strength by 3%. 3%, 12 warships, every weapon they had, 3%. On the Prometheus, Commander Deshi Okafor stood at the tactical station and watched the sensor data with the same expression a person might have while reading a mildly interesting weather report. He was a tall man with dark skin and close-cropped gray hair. He had designed the Prometheus's combat doctrine personally, and he had spent years running simulations against every type of alien weapon system they had been able to study. This engagement was going almost exactly as his models had predicted. The Imperial weapons were energetic but crude, which they were built to overwhelm through volume, not precision. Against the Prometheus's adaptive shield matrix, they were meaningless. "They can't hurt us, Captain," Okafor said to Vasquez. Vasquez was still sitting in her command chair. She had not stood up during the entire engagement. She had not raised her voice. She had watched 12 alien warships throw everything they had at her ship, and she had felt nothing but sadness. She had not come here to fight. She had come here to talk. But talking required that the other side understood who they were talking to. "One turret," Vasquez said. "Forward battery 7, lowest power setting." "Lowest power confirmed," Okafor said. He keyed in the command. A single turret on the forward hull of the Prometheus rotated and locked onto the Fang of Dominion. It was one of the smaller turrets. Not even a main battery. The kind of weapon that the Prometheus used for point defense against fighters and missiles. Okafor set it to its absolute minimum output, which was roughly 0.1% of the weapon's total capability. It fired. A beam of white-blue light, perfectly focused and impossibly precise, lanced across the space between the two ships. It struck the Fang of Dominion exactly at its midsection. The beam did not explode. It did not scatter. It cut. It sliced through the cruiser's hull the way a hot wire passes through soft wax, severing the ship cleanly into two halves. The cut was so precise that the emergency bulkheads on both halves of the ship activated perfectly. Atmosphere was sealed. Power systems on both halves remained functional. The artificial gravity held. Not a single crew member was killed. Not a single crew member was even injured. The Fang of Dominion had been split in two, and it had been done with the care of a surgeon performing an operation. Vryn found himself floating in the forward half of his ship. The bridge had emergency power. The lights were red. Through the viewport behind him, he could see the aft section of his own ship drifting slowly away. the cut edge glowing faintly with residual heat. It was the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. The communication system was still working. Captain Vasquez's voice filled the bridge. "Humanity does not want a war," she said. Her voice was the same as it had always been, calm, steady, like a river that would not be moved. "But we are done being surveyed, cataloged, and ignored. We have been watching the stars for a long time, and now we are here. Take us to your conclave." Nobody on any of the 12 ships said a word. There was nothing to say. They had fired everything they had and accomplished nothing. In return, the humans had fired once, at minimum power, with a point defense turret, and had cut a cruiser in half without killing anyone. The message was clear. It was the loudest silence the galaxy had ever heard. Vryn floated in his ruined bridge and stared out the viewport. The Prometheus hung in space beyond the glass, enormous and dark and patient. Its weapons had powered down. Its shield still shimmered faintly. It was waiting. It could afford to wait. It had all the time in the universe. He reached for his communication panel with a hand that did not feel like his own. His claws were shaking. His whole body was shaking. But he opened a channel to Admiral Zur's flagship and spoke 3 words that would change the history of the galaxy. "Send everyone, now." Then he closed the channel and sat in the red emergency light of his broken ship and tried to understand what had just happened. 200 years. That was all the time the humans had needed. 200 years from burning dead plants to this, to a ship that treated the best weapons in the galaxy like rain on a window. What kind of species could do that? And more importantly, what kind of species would choose not to use that power to destroy? The Prometheus could have wiped out all 12 cruisers in seconds. Vryn knew that now with absolute certainty. But it had not done that. It had cut his ship in half with the precision of a teacher drawing a line on a board. It had made its point. And then it had stopped. That frightened Vryn more than anything else. Because a species that built weapons like that and then chose restraint was far more dangerous than a species that simply attacked. Attackers were predictable. Their limits were visible. But a species that could destroy you completely and chose not to? You could never know their limits. You could never know when they might change their mind. The Prometheus waited in the dark, and somewhere, far away, Admiral Zur was receiving the message. He would listen to it. He would hear the fear in Vryn's voice. And for the first time in a very long career, the old Admiral would realize that the universe was not what he had thought it was. It was much, much bigger than that, and the humans were in it now. And the High Conclave of the Valori Galactic Empire met in a chamber that was older than most civilizations. It was built into the heart of the capital world, Valor Prime, carved from a single piece of living crystal that grew and shifted with the centuries. The walls glowed with a soft amber light. The ceiling was so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. 1,000 seats were arranged in a great circle, and in those seats sat the representatives of 100 species who had built an empire that stretched across 3 galactic arms. They were afraid. Nobody said it out loud. These were diplomats and generals and governors, and people like that did not admit to fear. But it was in the room like a smell that could not be washed away. It had been 3 days since Patrol Group 7 had been neutralized in the neutral corridor, and in those 3 days the news had spread across every communication network in the Empire. A human warship, a single ship. It had shrugged off the combined firepower of 12 cruisers and then cut one of them in half with a weapon set to its lowest power. The sensor data had been verified 17 times. Nobody believed it the first time, or the second, or the 5th. By the 17th verification, the disbelief had turned into something much worse. Admiral Zur had mobilized the entire 9th Expansion Fleet. 800 warships now formed a blockade across the neutral corridor, their weapons hot and their crews nervous. But the Prometheus had not moved. It sat in space like a stone in a river, letting the current flow around it, untroubled and unmoved. And then the humans had sent a shuttle. Conclave speaker Orith Mon stood at the center of the great chamber and watched the human ambassador walk through the entrance. Orith was Dravathi, which meant he looked like a tree that had decided to start walking. He was ancient. His bark skin was cracked with age, and his branch-like arms moved slowly, as if every gesture cost him effort. He had led the conclave for 400 years, and in all that time, he had never seen the chamber this quiet. The human ambassador was a woman named Elena Zhao. She was small by the standards of most species in the room. She had black hair streaked with gray, and she wore a simple dark uniform with no medals or decorations. She walked with the straight-backed posture of someone who had been a soldier before she became a diplomat. Two human guards walked behind her, both of them tall and silent and watching everything with sharp eyes. Zhao reached the center of the chamber and stopped. She looked around at the 1,000 faces staring down at her. Reptilian faces, insectoid faces, crystalline faces, faces that belonged to species who had traveled between stars when humans were still living in caves. She did not look afraid. She did not look aggressive. She looked like someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. "My name is Elena Zhao," she said. Her voice was clear and carried easily through the vast chamber. "I am here as the representative of the Terran Unified Government and the 7 billion people of Earth. I carry a message and I carry a gift." She held up a small object. It was a crystal about the size of a closed fist, and it glowed with a faint blue light. "Now, this is a data crystal," Zhao said. "It contains a full technical readout of the ship that your Navy encountered 3 days ago, the UNS Prometheus. It also contains a complete overview of the Terran Unified Navy's current military capabilities. We are giving you this information freely and without conditions." A murmur went through the chamber. Speaker Orith raised one branch arm, and the room went quiet again. "Before your analysts review this data," Zhao continued, "I would like to tell you a story. I think it will help you understand what you are about to see." She paused. She took a breath, and then she told them. 197 years ago, the Valori survey ship Quiet Observer completed its cataloging mission of the Sol system. It spent 14 days scanning Earth, recording population data, technology levels, air and cultural development. It classified humans as Tier 9, pre-spaceflight primitives, and it moved on. This was routine. The Valori had cataloged thousands of primitive species. Humans were nothing special. But the Quiet Observer made a mistake. As it left Earth's orbit, one of its secondary scanning probes malfunctioned and fell into the planet's atmosphere. It crashed into the Pacific Ocean, 4 kilometers below the surface, in a trench so deep that no human had ever been there. It sat there for 6 years before a deep-sea research vessel found it by accident. The governments of Earth did not know what they had found, not at first. The probe was damaged, and its technology was so far beyond anything humans had ever built that it might as well have been magic. But humans had a quality that the Valori survey report had failed to identify. The report said moderate intelligence. What it should have said was relentless, obsessive, terrified intelligence. Because the probe told humans something that changed everything. They were not alone. And the beings they shared the galaxy with were so far ahead of them that the gap was almost meaningless. It was like an ant discovering that giants existed. The ant could not fight the giants. The ant could not hide from the giants. The ant could only hope that the giants never decided to step on it. Humans did not accept this. A unified scientific body was created in total secrecy. It was called the Black Vault Program, and it was the largest and most ambitious project in human history. Every major nation on Earth contributed scientists, engineers, and resources. For the first time, the entire species worked together toward a single goal. The goal was survival. The head of the Black Vault program was a man named Arav Mishra. He was a physicist from a country called India, and he was the kind of person who looked at an impossible problem and simply refused to accept that it was impossible. He gathered the brightest minds on the planet and gave them one instruction: take this alien technology apart, understand it, and then build something better. They did not just reverse engineer the probe. That would have been enough for most species. They would have learned how the alien technology worked and then built copies of it. That would have been the logical thing to do. But humans were not logical. Humans were afraid. Fear did something to the human mind that Mishra had not expected. It did not make them careful. It made them creative. Every piece of alien technology they pulled from the probe, they treated not as a solution, but as a starting point. They looked at the Valori plasma reactor design and said, "This is clever, but it is not enough." They looked at the subspace drive schematics and said, "This works, but it is too slow." They looked at the hull alloy composition and said, "This is strong, but it will break." And then they made them better. In 40 years, they had matched the technology level of the probe. In 80 years, they had surpassed it. In 120 years, they had developed technologies that the probe's original builders had never imagined. The contained stellar fusion reactor was a human invention. No other species had achieved it. When they had taken the concept of plasma containment and pushed it until they could hold a piece of a star inside a magnetic bottle the size of a room. The crystalline hull lattice was a human invention. They had grown it in orbital laboratories, molecule by molecule, creating a material that was harder than anything in nature and could repair itself when damaged. The layered shield matrix was a human invention. Every species in the galaxy used single-layer energy shields. The Valori had theorized that multiple overlapping shields might be possible, but the math had never worked. Human mathematicians made the math work. They did it in a university, on a blackboard, and the woman who solved the equation was 26 years old. And they did all of this in silence. No transmissions, no expansion, no colonies, no signals of any kind. For 200 years, humanity hid. They built their fleet in the frozen darkness of the Oort cloud, the vast shell of ice and rock that surrounded their solar system, so far from the sun that no one would think to look there. They trained their crews, they tested their weapons, they prepared, and they waited. Zhao finished her story, and the chamber was completely silent. No one moved, no one spoke. 1,000 representatives of 100 species sat in their ancient seats and tried to process what they had just been told. Speaker Orith was the first to speak. His voice was low and rough, like wind through old wood. "You are telling us," he said slowly, "that your species went from chemical rockets to stellar-class warships in less than 200 years. "Yes," Zhao said. "That is not possible. And yet here I am." Orith was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured to the conclave's chief analyst, a Valori scientist named Korith, who had been examining the data crystal on a portable console. Korith looked up. His face was the color of old paper. "The data is verified," Korith said. His voice cracked on the last word. "The Prometheus is one ship in a fleet of 300 dreadnoughts of similar capability. The Terran Unified Navy also fields approximately 4,000 smaller vessels, including destroyers, frigates, and fast attack craft. Based on the technical specifications provided, any single Terran dreadnought could engage and defeat our entire Ninth Fleet." He paused. He looked down at his console. He looked back up. "Any single one," he repeated. "There are 300 of them." The chamber erupted. 1,000 voices speaking at once, in a dozen languages, all of them saying the same thing in different ways. "This cannot be real. This must be a trick. This must be a deception." But it was not a deception. The data was open. The specifications were detailed. The humans had given them everything, down to the reactor schematics and weapons frequencies. They had held nothing back, and that was what frightened Speaker Orith the most. Because a species that hid its strength was a species that feared discovery, but a species that showed its strength openly was a species that feared nothing at all. He raised his arms and the chamber fell silent again. It took longer this time. "Ambassador Zhao," Orith said, "I must ask you the question that I believe everyone in this chamber is thinking. Will you have built the most powerful military force this galaxy has ever seen? You have done it in secret, in silence, in the dark. And now you come to us, and you show us everything, and you say you want peace." He leaned forward. His ancient eyes were deep and dark and searching. "If you have this power," he said, "why come to us in peace? Why not simply take what you want? You could burn our worlds. You could shatter our fleets. You could end our empire in a single campaign. Why are you here in this chamber asking for dialogue?" Elena Zhao was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her hands. Then she looked up at the old Dravati speaker, and when she spoke, her voice was different. It was softer, not weaker, just honest in a way that it had not been before. "Because we know what it is like to be alone and afraid," she said. "We built all of this because we were terrified of you. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology we developed came from the same place. Fear. We looked up at the stars and we saw an empire that was 12,000 years old and had cataloged us like insects in a jar. We did not know if you would come back. We did not know if you would decide that our planet was useful and our species was not. So we built. We built until we were sure that nothing in this galaxy could ever threaten us again. She paused. But we did not build all of that to destroy you. We built it so we could stand in front of you as equals and say what I'm about to say. She looked around the chamber one more time. No species in this galaxy should ever have to look up at the stars and feel the way we felt. Alone. Terrified. Wondering if anyone out there cared whether they lived or died. We built a wall around ourselves because we had no choice. Now we are here to make sure that no one else ever has to build that wall, including you. The chamber was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. The first silence had been shock. This silence was something else. It was the silence of 1,000 people reconsidering everything they thought they knew. In the back of the chamber, in a private booth reserved for military observers, Admiral Kathos Jur sat alone. He had been listening to the entire session through a secure relay. On the console in front of him, the technical readout from the data crystal was displayed in full. He had read every page, he had checked every number. His hands were on the console. They were shaking. Jur was old. He had commanded fleets for longer than most species lived. He had won battles and crushed rebellions and enforced the will of the Empire across 1,000 star systems. He had never been afraid of anything. Fear was for lesser species. Fear was for the young and the weak and the unprepared. But he was afraid now. Not of the human ships, not of their weapons or their shields or their impossible reactors. He was afraid because he understood what Zhao had said in a way that perhaps no one else in the chamber could. She had said they built all of this from fear, and Jur knew what fear could do to a species. He had used fear as a weapon his entire career. He had seen what frightened species were capable of when they were pushed into a corner. But he had never seen a species that had been frightened by the entire galaxy. He had never seen a species that had looked at the universe itself and said, "We will not be victims." He had never seen a species that had taken their terror and forged it into something that could make an empire tremble. He looked at the technical readouts one more time. 300 dreadnoughts, 4,000 support vessels, reactor technology that his own engineers could not even understand, weapons that could cut a cruiser in half at minimum power. And they had done it in 200 years, while his empire had taken 12,000 to reach its current level and had stopped advancing centuries ago because there was nothing left to advance toward. His hands would not stop shaking. Quietly, without telling anyone, he opened a communication channel to the Ninth Fleet. His voice was steady even if his hands were not. Old habits. All ships, he said. Stand down from combat readiness. Power down weapons. Return to standard patrol formation. This is not a drill. He did not give a reason. He did not explain himself. He simply gave the order and closed the channel and sat in the dark booth and listened as Ambassador Zhao began discussing the terms of a new relationship between humanity and the galaxy. And far away, in the cold silence of the neutral corridor, the Prometheus waited, patient, quiet, its weapons dark, its shields humming softly. A fortress built by frightened children who had grown up and decided that strength without mercy was not strength at all. The stars shone around it, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the galaxy held its breath. In the weeks that followed Ambassador Zhao's address to the High Conclave, the Valori Galactic Empire did what all large organizations do when they are faced with something they cannot control. It argued with itself. The conclave fractured into factions overnight. Some wanted alliance. Some wanted isolation. Some wanted to pretend the humans did not exist and hope that would make it true. And some wanted war. Counselor Vaeth Skal wanted war more than anyone. Skal was Valori, pure-blooded and proud of it. He was a general before he was a politician, and he still wore his military medals on his conclave robes because he wanted everyone to remember that he had earned his seat through blood, not through speeches. He was tall for his species, with scales that had gone from green to a deep bronze with age, and he had the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed. He stood before the conclave on the seventh day after first contact and made his argument. "You are all being fooled, Story," he said. He did not soften the words. He never did. "The humans come to us with a smile and an open hand, and you reach out to take it like children accepting sweets from a stranger. Think, why would any species reveal its full military capability to a potential enemy? There is only one reason: because they are hiding something greater. What they showed us is what they want us to see. What they did not show us is what should terrify you," the chamber murmured. Skal pressed on. 200 years ago, they were animals burning dead plants for warmth. Now they have a fleet that could destroy us. What will they have in another 200 years? In 500? In 1,000? Every day that we do not act, they grow stronger. Every day the gap between us widens. If we are going to survive, we must strike now, while their numbers are still finite and their territory is still small. It was a powerful argument. It was also, in a cold and logical way, not entirely wrong. Several conclave members nodded. The fear that Skal was selling was easy to buy, because it was the same fear that many of them already felt. Speaker Orith listened to all of this from his seat at the center of the chamber. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. When Skal finished, Orith simply noted the position and moved to the next item on the agenda, which was the matter of cultural exchange. Because while the politicians argued about war and peace, something else was happening. Something that none of them had anticipated. Something that would prove to be far more powerful than any weapon the humans had built. The humans had started sharing their culture. It began as part of the diplomatic process. Standard protocol for first contact between species included an exchange of cultural data, language files, historical records, scientific knowledge. Every species did this. It was usually boring. The Valori had done it 1,000 times with 1,000 species and had never found anything surprising. Culture was culture. Every species had art and music and stories. Some were better than others. None of them were remarkable. Human culture was remarkable. The first sign of trouble came when the Conclave's Cultural Analysis Division began reviewing the human music files. A junior analyst named Preth was assigned to catalog the submissions. He was Valori, the young and bored, and he expected the task to take an afternoon. It took him 3 weeks, and by the end of it, he had not slept properly in days. The problem was volume. Humans had not sent a representative sample of their music. They had sent everything. Thousands of years of musical development, from simple drum beats to orchestral compositions of staggering complexity. Preth listened to a piece called Symphony No. 9 by a human named Beethoven and sat at his desk for 20 minutes afterward, unable to speak. He was not sure why. The music had done something to him that he did not have words for. It had reached inside his chest and touched something that he had not known was there. He was not the only one. The music spread through the capital like a fire. Copies of the human files were shared unofficially among analysts, students, and curious citizens. Within 2 weeks, Beethoven was being played in public spaces on Valor Prime. Within 3 weeks, the human composers Bach, Mozart, and a group called Pink Floyd were being discussed in academic journals. Within a month, a cellist philosopher published a paper arguing that human music represented the most sophisticated emotional communication system ever developed by any species in the galaxy. But the music was only the beginning. The Conclave's literary division received the human fiction archive and did not know what to do with it. Other species had stories, of course. Creation myths, historical epics, moral fables. Every civilization produced these. But humans had developed fiction into something that no other species had ever imagined. They had created entire worlds that did not exist. They had written stories about people who had never lived, in places that had never been, facing problems that had never occurred. And they had done it with such skill and emotional precision that readers from completely alien species found themselves caring about characters who were not even real. A Dravathi librarian read a human book called Les Miserables and wept for 3 days. She had never wept before. Dravathi did not weep. Their biology did not support it, but her body found a way. A Valori military strategist read a human book called The Art of War, and then read another called All Quiet on the Western Front, and then sat in his office for a long time, thinking about the fact that the same species had produced both. One was a manual for winning wars. The other was a plea to stop fighting them. Both were brilliant. Both were sincere. The strategist did not know what to do with a species that could hold both of those ideas in its head at the same time. And then there was the humor. The galaxy had humor. Every species had some form of it. But human humor was different in a way that was hard to define. It was sharper. It was darker. It was capable of being cruel and kind in the same sentence. Humans made jokes about death, about suffering, about the meaninglessness of existence. And somehow these jokes made the darkness smaller instead of larger. The Chelith, who had no real tradition of humor in their culture, became obsessed with something called stand-up comedy and started hosting their own open mic nights in the capital. They were terrible at it, but they kept trying, which was itself very human. In the middle of all of this, when a human arrived on Valor Prime, who would become the unexpected center of the cultural storm. Dr. Rena Solwyn was a civilian scientist from the Prometheus, a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying alien life forms through remote data and had never actually seen one in person. She was 41 years old, had curly red hair that she never managed to keep under control, and she smiled at everything. She smiled at the architecture. She smiled at the food. She smiled at the aliens who towered over her and could have broken her in half with one hand. She asked questions constantly, not the sharp questions of an interrogator, but the excited questions of a child seeing snow for the first time. The conclave assigned her a liaison. His name was Tharek, and he was a young Chalith student studying interspecies communication at the Capital University. He was chosen because he was junior enough to be expendable and because nobody expected the assignment to be important. He was wrong on both counts. Tharek met Dr. Solwyn at the diplomatic quarter on his first morning. She was standing in the middle of the street, looking up at the crystal towers of the Capitol with her mouth open. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she said to him, before he had even introduced himself. Tharek was not sure how to respond. The crystal towers were old. Everyone on Valor Prime had seen them 1,000 times. Nobody thought they were beautiful anymore. They were just there, like the sky or the ground. "They are administrative buildings," he said. "I know," Dr. Solwyn said, still staring upward. "But look at the way the light moves through them. It is like they are alive." Tharek looked at the towers. He had walked past them every day for 6 years. He had never once looked at the light moving through them. He looked now. She was right. It was beautiful. This happened again and again over the following days. Solwyn saw beauty in things that Tharek had never noticed. She found the patterns in Chelith shell markings fascinating and spent an hour sketching them in a small notebook she carried everywhere. She tasted Valori street food and made sounds of such enthusiastic pleasure that the vendor gave her extra portions for free. She discovered that Dravathi elders hummed to themselves when they were thinking, and she stood near one for 20 minutes, just listening, and with an expression of complete peace on her face. Tharek found her confusing. She was a member of a species that had built weapons capable of destroying worlds, and she was delighted by street food. She came from a fleet of warships that could crush the Empire, and she was sketching shell patterns in a notebook. It did not make sense. On the 5th day, Solwyn gave him a small device. It was a rectangular object that fit in his hand, with a single button and a small speaker. "It is a music player," she said. "I loaded it with some things I thought you might like." Tharek took it back to his quarters that evening and pressed the button. The first piece that played was Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, 4th movement, the Ode to Joy. He sat on his bed and listened. At first, he did not understand what he was hearing. The sounds were strange. Where Chelith music, what little of it existed, was rhythmic and sharp, like the clicking of shells. This was different. It was layered. It built. It started quietly and then grew, adding voices and instruments, each one weaving into the others until the sound was so full that it seemed impossible that it could all fit into such a small speaker. And then the human voices came in, singing, not in a language he understood, but it did not matter. The voices carried something beyond words. They carried joy, not the small, safe joy of a pleasant day or a good meal. This was the kind of joy that had been forged in suffering. It was the joy of a species that had known darkness and had chosen, stubbornly and defiantly, to sing anyway. Thark did not realize he was crying until the tears had already reached his mandibles. Chelith did not cry often. It was not a common response in their biology, but his body did it anyway, the same way the Dravathi librarian had wept over a human novel. Something in the music bypassed every cultural and biological barrier and spoke directly to something deeper, something universal. He played it again and again. He played it 7 times that night and did not sleep. The next morning he found Salwyn at her usual spot, staring at the crystal towers. "Why?" he asked her. It was the only word he could manage. She looked at him. She understood the question. "Because we feel everything," she said simply. "Every emotion, all the time, all at once. Joy and grief and rage and love and fear. We cannot turn any of it off, so we learn to put it into things. Music, stories, paintings, dance. It is how we survive ourselves." Tharek thought about this. He thought about a species that felt everything so intensely that they had to invent art just to keep from being destroyed by their own emotions. And then he thought about that same species building the Prometheus, building 300 dreadnoughts, building weapons that could shatter worlds. They had built both with the same passion, the same intensity, the same desperate need to take what they felt and make it real. That was the thing the Empire had not expected. The warship was terrifying. The fleet was terrifying. The technology was terrifying. But none of it was as unsettling as the realization that the beings who had built all of those things were the same beings who had written symphonies and novels and poems about love and loss and the beauty of a sunset. The galaxy had seen powerful species before. It had never seen one that was powerful and beautiful at the same time. Counselor Skull felt his coalition crumbling. It was hard to convince people to go to war against a species when that species' music was being played in every public square in the capital. It was hard to call them monsters when their stories were making people weep with recognition and their humor was making people laugh until they could not breathe. Every day, the cultural exchange chipped away at the wall of fear that Skull had been building. He grew desperate. On the 31st day after first contact, Skull made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He met in secret with a group of hardline military officers from the fringe territories of the Empire. These were not conclave members. They were men and women who believed that the Empire's survival required action, not discussion. Skull gave them access to the old survey data for Earth's solar system, the same data that the Quiet Observer had collected 197 years ago. "The humans showed us their fleet," Skull told them, "but a fleet must have a home. Strike the home, and the fleet becomes a group of orphans with nowhere to return. Their homeworld is a single planet, one planet. Destroy it, and this problem goes away forever." It was genocide dressed up as strategy. The officers agreed. They assembled a stealth fleet of 200 ships drawn from reserve forces in the outer territories, ships that would not be missed immediately. They equipped them with the most powerful weapons available and programmed their navigation systems with the old survey data. When the fleet jumped to Seoul, they arrived at the edge of the solar system and immediately dropped out of subspace, ready to begin their approach to the third planet from the star, ready to end the human threat forever. They found something waiting for them. Earth was surrounded by a defense grid. 10,000 autonomous weapons platforms hung in orbit around the planet and throughout the inner solar system. They were arranged in overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible approach vector. Each platform was roughly the size of an Imperial frigate, and each one carried weapons that the stealth fleet's sensors could not fully identify, but whose energy signatures suggested they were capable of cracking a planet's crust. 10,000 of them. The stealth fleet had barely completed its translation out of subspace when every single platform oriented on them simultaneously. 200 ships detected in less than a second, targeted in less than 2. And then a message played across every communication channel the stealth fleet carried. It was automated. It was not a voice that sounded angry or threatening. It was calm and clear, like a recorded announcement in a transit station. "You are seen. You are welcome to leave. You will not be warned again." 200 ships hung in the dark at the edge of a foreign solar system. 200 captains looked at their sensor displays and saw 10,000 weapons platforms pointed directly at them. The math was simple. The math was final. They turned around. Every single ship powered up its subspace drives and jumped back the way it had come. Not one of them fired a shot. Not one of them even considered it. You did not fight 10,000 automated weapons platforms with 200 ships. You did not fight them with 2,000 ships. You did not fight them at all. Skal received the news in his private chambers on Valor Prime. The fleet had returned. They had not fired a single weapon. Earth was untouchable. He sat in his chair and stared at the wall and understood finally what Ambassador Zhao had meant. The humans had not shown the Conclave everything. They had shown the Conclave their fleet, their dreadnoughts, their offensive capability. What they had not shown them was their defensive capability, because the defense grid around Earth was not in the data crystal. The 10,000 platforms were not mentioned in the technical readout. The humans had given the Empire their sword to examine. They had kept their shield hidden, and the shield was bigger than the sword. Somewhere on Valor Prime, in a public garden near the university, Theric sat on a bench with his music player and listened to Beethoven for the 43rd time. The sun was setting, and the crystal towers were catching the light in the way that Solwyn had taught him to see. He did not know about the stealth fleet. He did not know about the defense grid. He did not know that the galaxy had just been a few minutes away from a war that would have destroyed everything. He just sat and listened to the music and watched the light and thought about a species that could feel everything all at once and had somehow survived it. He thought they might be the bravest species he had ever heard of, not because of their ships or their weapons or their shields, because of the music, because despite everything, despite the fear and the darkness and the knowledge that the universe was vast and cold and did not care about them at all, they had still found a way to sing. Counselor Vaeth Skal stood in the center of the conclave chamber in chains. They were not physical chains. The Vailori did not use physical restraints on their own people. The chains were ceremonial, bands of dull gray metal that hung loosely around his wrists and clinked softly when he moved. They were a symbol. They told everyone in the chamber that this man had been judged and found guilty, and that whatever he said next would be the last thing he said as a free person. Skal did not look broken. He stood straight. His bronze scales caught the amber light of the chamber, and his eyes were clear and hard. He had launched an unauthorized military strike against a sovereign world. He had assembled a secret fleet. He had attempted genocide. The evidence was beyond dispute. His own officers had testified against him. Speaker Orith read the charges in his slow, ancient voice. Each one fell into the silence of the chamber like a stone dropped into deep water. Unauthorized mobilization of imperial military assets. Conspiracy to commit acts of war without conclave authorization. Attempted destruction of a sovereign homeworld. Violation of the Neutral Corridor Accords. When the charges were finished, Skal was given the right to speak. This was tradition. Every condemned person was allowed final words. He looked around the chamber. 1,000 faces looked back at him. Some were angry, some were sad, some were afraid, but not of him. They were afraid because they knew on some level that what he had tried to do came from the same fear that lived in all of them. He had just been the one foolish enough to act on it. "I am not sorry," Skal said. His voice was steady. "I will not apologize for trying to protect this empire. You can call me a criminal. You can call me a warmonger. You can lock me away until my scales turn to dust. But I want you to remember one thing." He paused. He looked directly at Speaker Orith. 200 years ago, they were primitives. They had not even left their own world. In 200 years, they built a fleet that can destroy us. 200 years. He let the words hang in the air. You are sitting here, celebrating peace and listening to their music and reading their stories. And you are not asking the question that matters. What will they be in 200 more years? In 500? In 1,000? The chamber was silent. "You do not understand what they are," Skal said, and for the first time his voice carried something that was not anger. It was genuine, honest terror. "They are not a species. They are a force. They do not stop. They do not plateau. They do not reach a level and settle there the way every other civilization in this galaxy has done. They keep going. They keep building. They keep advancing. And one day, whether it is in 100 years or 1,000, they will be so far beyond us that we will be to them what insects are to us. He looked around the chamber one final time. I tried to stop that, he said. I failed. Akra and you will all live long enough to wish that I had not. He said nothing else. The guards led him away. The chamber remained silent for a long time after he was gone. Because he was right. Everyone knew he was right. Not about the genocide. That was monstrous. And no one in the chamber would defend it. But the question he had asked was real, and it sat in the center of the room like a crack in the floor that everyone was trying to step around. What would humans be in another 200 years? It was Speaker Orith who finally broke the silence. He rose from his seat slowly, his old bark skin creaking, and he spoke in the voice of someone who had lived long enough to know that fear was the worst possible foundation for a decision. Counselor Skull asked the right question, Orith said. What will the humans become? I do not know. And none of us can know. But I know this. The answer to that question depends on what we do next. If we treat them as enemies, they will become enemies. If we try to contain them, they will break free and remember that we tried. If we ignore them, they will grow beyond us in the dark, just as they did before. He looked around the chamber. Or we can do something that this empire has never done in 12,000 years. We can treat another species as an equal, not because we must, not because they forced us, but because it is right. And because the alternative is a future where the most powerful species in the galaxy remembers that we tried to destroy their home. The chamber stirred. Orith raised one branch arm for silence. Ambassador Zhao has asked to address the conclave one final time. I believe we should hear her. Elena Zhao walked to the center of the chamber for the second time. She looked different than she had during her first address. Not older exactly, but more worn. The weeks since first contact had been long for everyone, humans included. She had spent those weeks in meetings, negotiations, arguments, and late nights that blurred together into a single exhausting stretch of time. But her eyes were still clear, and her back was still straight. And when she spoke, her voice still carried the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what she was going to say and why it mattered. I have listened to Counselor Skull's words, she said, and I want to tell you something that might surprise you. He is not wrong. The chamber went very still. Humanity will continue to advance, Zhao said. We will develop new technologies. We will expand. We will grow. That is what we do. It is what we have always done. We cannot stop it any more than you can stop a river from flowing downhill. In another 200 years, yes, we will almost certainly be more powerful than we are today. Counselor Skull is right about that. She paused. But he is wrong about what that means. Because power is not the same as intent. A knife can cut bread, or it can cut flesh. The knife does not choose. The hand that holds it chooses. And we are here today to tell you what we choose. She reached into her uniform and pulled out a second data crystal. It was smaller than the first one, and it glowed with a warm golden light instead of blue. This contains a formal proposal from the Terran Unified Government. We call it the Galactic Compact. She held the crystal up so the chamber could see it. It is not a treaty of submission. We will not submit to anyone ever again, and we would never ask you to submit to us. It is not an alliance of convenience that we will abandon when it no longer serves our interests. It is a compact, a promise, a binding agreement between equals. She set the crystal down on the podium in front of her. The terms are simple. Humanity will share its technology with every signatory species, freely and without conditions. Our fusion reactors, our shield systems, our medical advances. Everything we have built in 200 years of fear and determination, we will give away. Any species that signs the compact will have access to everything we know. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the chamber. Zhao waited for it to pass. In addition, humanity will commit its military forces to the defense of any signatory species that is attacked. An attack on one will be treated as an attack on all. No species in this compact will ever face a threat alone. She paused again. This was the moment she had been building toward. The room could feel it. In return, we ask for one thing. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. Never catalog a species as beneath you again. The words were simple. They were quiet. and they hit the chamber like a physical force. No more Tier 9 classifications, Zhao said. No more surveying a world and writing primitive in a file and flying away. No more looking down at a species that has not yet left its planet and deciding that they do not matter. Because we were that species, and we were the ones in the file, and we remember how it felt. Her voice did not waver. It did not rise. It stayed exactly where it was, calm and clear and certain. Every species matters. Every world matters. Every civilization that is struggling to build its first fire or launch its first rocket matters. Because you do not know what they will become. You did not know what we would become. And if we had been less lucky, if we had not found that probe, we might still be on Earth right now, looking up at the stars and wondering why no one ever came back. She stepped back from the podium. That is our offer: technology, protection, partnership, in exchange for the promise that this galaxy will never again treat a young species as something to be filed away and forgotten. That is what humanity wants. Sarishun, that is all we have ever wanted. Speaker Orth was quiet for a long time. The amber light of the chamber moved slowly across his bark skin, and his ancient eyes were wet with something that Dravati did not have a word for. Finally he spoke. Ambassador Zhao, you come from a species that was terrified of us. You built weapons that could destroy everything we have built in 12,000 years. And now you stand before us and offer to give it all away. Forgive an old man for asking, but I must understand. Why? Why would you surrender the very advantage that makes you untouchable? Zhao smiled. It was a small smile, tired and real and warm. Because we have been the ones looking up at the sky, she said, terrified and alone, wondering if anyone out there cared whether we lived or died. We spent 200 years building a wall around ourselves because we had no choice. But a wall keeps you safe, and it also keeps you alone. We are tired of being alone, Speaker. We are tired of being afraid. She looked up at the vast crystal ceiling of the chamber. We built all of this so we could stand here today and say, the wall is open. Come in. We will keep you safe. And in return, we ask you to do the same for everyone who comes after us. That is the deal. That is the compact. The vote was not unanimous. 17 species voted against the compact, most of them allies of Skal's faction or species whose pride would not allow them to accept gifts from a civilization that had been classified as primitive within living memory. But the majority was overwhelming. 83 species voted in favor. The Galactic Compact was signed in the amber light of the conclave chamber, and when it was done, Speaker Orith and Ambassador Zhao clasped hands at the center of the room, and the chamber erupted in a sound that had not been heard there in a very long time. Applause. Not polite, formal applause. Real applause. The kind that comes from relief and hope, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be better than they had been before. The news spread across the galaxy like light. In the months that followed, everything changed. Human engineers arrived on 100 worlds, sharing fusion technology with species that had been using plasma reactors for millennia. Medical teams brought treatments for diseases that had plagued alien civilizations for centuries. Agricultural scientists helped terraform barren moons into gardens. Yet educators developed cross-species learning programs that allowed children from different worlds to study together. And the humans kept advancing. Skal had been right about that. They did not stop. Within the first year of the compact, human researchers had already developed improvements to their own fusion reactors, and they shared those improvements immediately. Within 3 years, they had cracked a problem in subspace physics that had stumped the Empire's scientists for 800 years, and they published the solution openly, free for anyone to use. But something else happened that no one had predicted, not even the humans themselves. The other species started advancing too. Exposure to human creativity, human problem-solving, human stubbornness, and refusal to accept that anything was impossible, it was contagious. Valori scientists who had not published original research in centuries began experimenting again. Chelith engineers who had been content with existing designs began pushing boundaries. Drevity philosophers who had settled into comfortable traditions began asking uncomfortable questions. The galaxy was waking up. Not because humanity had forced it to, but because humanity had reminded it of something it had forgotten. that the universe was full of mysteries, and that solving them was the most exciting thing a thinking being could do. 50 years passed. On a space station that floated between three star systems, in a region of space that had once been the neutral corridor, a university had been built. It was one of the first institutions created under the Galactic Compact, and it had grown into the largest center of learning in the galaxy. Students from every signatory species attended classes together, ate meals together, argued and laughed and struggled together. Professor Tharek of the Chelith stood at the front of a lecture hall on the university's central campus. He was old now. His shell had gone from the smooth, dark brown of youth to a lighter, cracked pattern that showed his age. He moved more slowly than he once had, and he used a cane made from a piece of Dravathi heartwood that a friend had given him decades ago. But his mind was still sharp, and his mandibles still clicked in the way that meant he was thinking. His class was full. 40 students from 8 different species sat in the curved rows of seating, each watching him with the particular attention that students gave to a professor who was known for telling stories instead of reading from textbooks. Among them were Valori, Chelith, Dravathi, 2 members of a newer species called the Korath, who had been uplifted under the compact just 15 years ago, and 7 humans. Tharek looked at them all and felt something that he had spent 50 years learning the human word for: gratitude. Today, he said, I'm going to tell you a story. It is a story about the day that everything changed. Some of you have heard parts of it before. Some of you have read about it in your history texts, but none of you were there, and I was, so you are going to hear it from me. He tapped his cane on the floor once, which was his way of getting everyone's full attention. 50 years ago, I was a student. On that I was young and I was bored, and I did not think the universe had any surprises left in it. And then one day, a sensor officer at a border station detected something in the neutral corridor. Something that should not have been there. Something that did not match any known species in the Imperial database. He paused. The sensor officer's name was Tylen Vask. He was a good officer. Careful. Precise. He did what any good officer would do when he saw readings that did not make sense. He checked them again. Tharek smiled. It was a Chelith smile, which meant his mandibles parted slightly and his eyes narrowed, but the humans in the room could read it perfectly. 50 years of cultural exchange had taught everyone to read everyone else's expressions. He checked the readings twice, Tharek said, and they did not change. And because the ship that was sitting in the neutral corridor was real. It was called the Prometheus, and it belonged to a species that the Empire had cataloged as pre-space flight primitives less than 200 years earlier. He let that sink in. The humans had done something that no one believed was possible. In the time it takes most civilizations to make small improvements to existing technology, they had gone from burning fossil fuels to building the most powerful warship the galaxy had ever seen. They had done it in secret. They had done it in the dark. And they had done it because they were afraid. He looked at the human students in the room. They looked back at him steadily. They had grown up in a galaxy where humans were respected and admired and sometimes still feared, but they had not grown up in the dark. And they had not grown up looking at the stars and wondering if something out there wanted to destroy them. That was the gift their grandparents had given them. But here is the part of the story that I want you to remember, Tharek said. The humans could have used their power to conquer. They could have burned the Empire's worlds and taken whatever they wanted. No one could have stopped them. They knew that. We knew that. And for a while, everyone in the galaxy held their breath, waiting to see what the humans would do. He picked up a small object from his desk. It was old and worn, the casing scratched and faded. A small rectangular device with a single button and a tiny speaker. A music player. The same one that Dr. Rena Solwyn had given him 50 years ago. What they did, Tharek said, was play us a song. He pressed the button, and the tiny speaker crackled, and then the opening notes of Beethoven's Symphony No. 9 filled the lecture hall. It was tinny and thin from the old speaker, but it did not matter. The music was the music. It had not changed in hundreds of years, and it would not change in hundreds more. The humans were never the monsters we feared, Tharek said over the music. They were the frightened children who built a fortress and then opened the door. They were the species that felt everything so deeply that they had to invent art just to survive their own hearts. They were the ones who looked at the darkness and decided to sing. He let the music play for a moment. The lecture hall was very quiet. Some of the students were crying. The Korath students, who were new to human music, had gone completely still, and their large dark eyes wide with something that they did not yet have words for, but would spend the rest of their lives trying to understand. That is the story, Theric said. That is the story of how one ship changed the galaxy. Not with its weapons, not with its shields, not with its impossible reactor. It changed the galaxy because the people inside it chose to be more than their fear. He turned off the music player and set it down carefully. Class dismissed. The students gathered their things and filed out. Tharic stood at the front of the empty room and listened to the silence, and remembered a day, 50 years ago, when he had sat on a bench in a garden on Valor Prime and listened to Beethoven for the first time and had not understood why he was crying. He understood now. As the last students left the hall, a human girl with dark hair and bright eyes lingered near the door. She was sitting next to a Valori classmate, a young male with green scales who had been taking careful notes throughout the lecture. The human girl leaned close to him and whispered something. "We also built a really big gun," she said, "just in case." The Valori student looked at her. Then he laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from the belly and shook the shoulders and made the person next to you laugh too. The human girl grinned. They walked out together into the wide corridor of the university station, where students from 8 species were heading to their next classes, or the cafeteria, or the observation deck where you could watch 3 suns set at the same time. The corridor was loud with voices in a dozen languages. Sheena, and somewhere in the distance, someone was playing human music on a speaker, and somewhere else, a cellist student was attempting to tell a joke that he had heard from a human friend, and he was getting the timing wrong, but everyone was laughing anyway. The galaxy was not perfect. It would never be perfect. There were still disagreements and tensions in species that did not trust each other, and old wounds that had not fully healed. But it was better. It was so much better than it had been. And it had all started with a single ship, a single reading on a sensor display that did not make sense, a sensor officer who checked the numbers twice, and a species that had been afraid of the dark and had decided, against all reason and all logic and all probability, to light a fire so bright that the whole galaxy could see it. The Prometheus was a museum ship now. It floated in orbit above the university station, preserved exactly as it had been on the day it entered the neutral corridor. Students visited it on field trips. They walked its corridors and touched its hull and tried to imagine what it must have been like to be aboard it on that first day, when the whole galaxy was an unknown, and the only thing between humanity and oblivion was the ship beneath their feet. On the observation deck of the Prometheus, there was a plaque. It had been placed there by Captain Lena Vasquez on the day the ship was decommissioned. It was simple, just a few words engraved in steel, because humans had always loved steel, even after they learned to build with crystals and light. The plaque read, "We were afraid. We built this." Then we opened the door. Termas, the crew of the UNS Prometheus, on behalf of humanity. Below the plaque, someone had taped a small handwritten note. Nobody knew who had put it there or when. It had been there for years and no one had ever removed it. The note said, "P.S. The guns still work." And far below the station, the stars burned on, as they always had, as they always would. But they did not look the same as they once had. They did not look cold and distant and indifferent anymore. They looked like a neighborhood, and humanity was finally, after all those years of fear and silence and building in the dark, finally home.